Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at a region, the Balkans, that maybe isn't always front page news, but there's definitely growing concern there.
That's right.
We're seeing signs of tension rising and hearing these warnings about potential Russian involvement, which could, ripple outwards,
Right.
maybe even involve NATO.
Yeah, absolutely. And for you listening, we know you want to get a handle on what's important here, but without sort of drowning in details.
Right.
So our goal in this deep dive is really to understand the dynamics now in the Balkans, what might be driving Russia, and, well, what it all means for NATO and the EU.
Okay.
And we're drawing on some solid expert analysis to help figure it out.
And specifically, we're looking at analysis from Ivana Stradner. She's a research fellow at the Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Her specialty is Russia's influence campaigns, especially in the Western Balkans.
Yes, her work is quite insightful on this.
Okay, so let's just jump right in. What are the specific signs telling us things might be, well, escalating?
Well, one key thing is that it's not just speculation. We've actually seen warnings from multiple Western governments.
Oh, really?
Yeah, U.S. intelligence flagged potential escalations last year. And more recently, the U.K. government warned about what they called Putin's games in the region. So these aren't just vague worries.
Got it. So official warnings?
Yeah.
But are we seeing stuff on the ground, too? Things happening that back this up?
Absolutely. There have been these huge protests in Serbia. We can unpack those a bit more later.
Okay.
And crucially, you still have this worrying secessionist talk coming out of Bosnia and Herzegovina that hasn't gone away.
Right, the Republika Srpska situation.
Exactly. And maybe symbolically, there was that meeting not long ago between Putin and the head of the Serbian Orthodox Church. It just highlights how the church has long been, an avenue for Russian influence.
Tool for division, potentially.
It can be used that way, yeah. Historically, promoting shared Slavic or Orthodox identity that can definitely be leveraged for political alignment.
Okay, so with all this activity, what's Russia really after here? Doesn't seem like a straightforward land grab, does it?
No, that's a really important point. Our expert source, Stradner, suggests Russia's main goal here probably isn't grabbing territory.
So what then?
It could very well be about creating a distraction, a strategic one. Especially, with those negotiations bubbling away or stalled really between Russia, the U.S., and Ukraine over a ceasefire.
Ah, so stir things up in the Balkans to pull focus. Maybe get some leverage elsewhere.
Precisely. That seems to be the thinking. Russia can then try to position itself as, the indispensable mediator in the Balkans.
Right.
The unspoken message to the West is, look, if you want calm here, you need to talk to us, maybe make concessions elsewhere.
And they don't even need a massive military presence to do it.
Not necessarily. They've got established influence networks, and sadly, there's already a lot of weaponry floating around the region from previous conflicts.
Which brings us to that idea you mentioned, NATO and the EU being seen as paper tigers. What does that mean in this context?
Yeah, this is really central to Russia's possible playbook. You've got NATO members right there, Montenegro, North Macedonia, plus NATO and EU peacekeeping forces in Kosovo, in Bosnia. So it's a chance for Putin to test their resolve, see how committed these Western institutions really are.
Poke them and see if they flinch.
Exactly. Any hesitation, any sign they aren't united, Russia can exploit that to push this narrative that NATO and the EU are ineffective. Weak.
If they can stir up trouble, and NATO's response looks, slow or divided.
It just feeds that paper tiger image. We've seen it before, right?
Yeah.
Where a maybe measured but ultimately insufficient response gets read as a lack of real determination.
And this isn't happening in isolation, is it? You mentioned connections elsewhere.
Definitely. Stradner emphasizes you've got to connect the dots with what Russia's doing in places like Moldova or Georgia.
Right.
There's a pattern. Trying to assert influence, destabilize regions on its borders. And historically, think about the Baltics, Russia's long-standing interest there, often using Russian-speaking populations as a pretext for interference.
Okay, let's zoom in on some of these hotspots. Bosnia and Herzegovina sounds like a really fragile situation there.
It is, yeah. The Serb leader, Milorad Dodik, he's been saying for years he wants to pull Republika Srpska out of Bosnia.
These secessionist threats.
They're constant. But what makes it maybe more worrying now is this feeling both inside and outside the country that the West is just distracted, preoccupied with Ukraine, other crises.
Which might make Dodik feel bolder.
That's the concern, that he might think this is his moment to push harder than before.
And he claims Putin backs him in this, right? He's
Yeah.
quite open about it.
Well, yes, he says it publicly, all the time. Plus, he has this very close relationship with the Serbian president, Vučić.
How does that work?
Well, it's a bit of a complex dance. Sometimes Vučić can play the moderate, while Dodik ramps up the tension. It potentially gives them both leverage when dealing with the EU or the US, like a good cop, bad cop routine.
A risky game. What have the US and EU done about Dodik?
The US has put sanctions on him, signaling they're not happy. There's hope the EU might eventually do the same, but, getting all EU members to agree, it takes time.
Internal divisions.
Exactly. And meanwhile, the High Representative in Bosnia, the person meant to oversee the Dayton Peace Agreement, Russia actively tries to undermine their authority, challenges them constantly.
So Putin sees these old divisions, the ethno-religious ones, as something to exploit.
Absolutely fertile ground for him. It plays right into his strategy.
And Dodik made some particularly inflammatory remarks recently.
He did. Really dangerous stuff, suggesting Muslims should convert to Orthodox Christianity.
Wow.
Yeah. Given the history of the 90s ethnic cleansing, religious persecution, that kind of talk is incredibly potent. It just pours fuel on old fires.
It's just awful. Okay, what about Kosovo? What are the worries there?
With Kosovo, the main fear is spillover. If things really kick off elsewhere in the region, it could easily spread there, given the ongoing tensions with Serbia.
But is the West more alert there now?
Our expert, Stradner, thinks so, yes. There seems to be a bit more assertiveness recently. They've increased the NATO peacekeeping force, KFOR, and there's generally more awareness now of the kinds of tactics Russia and Serbia might use to destabilize things.
And North Macedonia, Montenegro, they're NATO members. Does that make them safe?
Not completely immune, no. Membership is a huge security guarantee, obviously, but they're still vulnerable to destabilization efforts from the neighborhood.
How so?
The concern there is more about those little green men tactics.
Ah, the unmarked operatives.
Exactly. Sowing discord, creating instability, but with plausible deniability for whoever is behind it, potentially Serbia or Russia in this case.
Okay, let's talk about Serbia itself. You mentioned those massive protests earlier. What set those off?
Yeah, reports suggest they were huge back in March, maybe even bigger than the ones during the Milosevic era.
Really?
Apparently so. The immediate spark was actually a tragic accident, a canopy collapse that killed people. It highlighted safety issues, government oversight problems.
But it grew beyond that.
Oh, yeah. It quickly became about wider anger with the government, and significantly, students were really driving it, demanding more accountability, democratic freedoms.
And how did the Serbian government react? And Russia?
Predictably, really. Both Belgrade and Moscow framed it as a Western plot.
A color revolution.
Exactly. A color revolution, a Maidan scenario, all aimed at overthrowing the government. You have to remember, back in 2021, Serbia and Russia actually signed an agreement specifically saying they'd work together to fight these so-called color revolutions.
So that's their go-to narrative.
It is. It helps them delegitimize the protesters, ignore the actual reasons people are unhappy.
Is Russia doing other things to influence Serbia? Beyond just the narrative?
Oh, definitely. There's a massive ongoing propaganda effort in Serbia. It directly mirrors Russian talking points on everything.
Like what?
Like pushing false claims that Ukraine attacked Russia first, or that the U.S. has bioweapons designed to target Slavs, that kind of stuff.
Wow.
And disturbingly, there were even reports apparently being investigated with help from Russia's FSB that the Serbian government might have used sonic weapons against protesters.
That's deeply concerning. It sounds like a very tight alignment.
Mhm.
What's the EU's role been in all this? How have they handled Serbia?
Well, Stradner is pretty critical of the EU's past approach. She basically calls it appeasement of President Vučić.
Appeasement. How so?
The EU focused heavily on Serbia's EU path, the whole process of maybe joining someday. But often that meant turning a blind eye to democratic backsliding or other issues.
The thinking was just keep them engaged, offer membership, and they'll reform.
That seems to have been the hope,
Yeah.
that engagement would bring stability and change. But, well, it hasn't really worked out that way.
It failed.
Largely, yes. And Stradner draws a parallel, a sobering one, back to the early 90s in Yugoslavia. This naive belief that just economic ties would be enough to prevent conflict. It ignores strong nationalist feelings and, crucially, external meddling.
A tough lesson.
Yeah.
Heard again, perhaps. Let's talk more about that Serbia-Russia relationship. How far back does it go?
Oh, centuries. Way before World War I. The shared Orthodox faith, cultural ties, that's always been the foundation.
Bedrock.
Yeah. And it's consistently been a channel for Russian influence. It's different from Tito's Yugoslavia, which, managed to balance East and West during the Cold War. Serbia's generally leaned much more towards Russia culturally and politically.
And does that history make Serbia extra susceptible to Russian influence now?
It certainly helps Russia. They've been working on this for a long time, using propaganda and other means. And the current Serbian government's own ideology, especially the Serbian world idea,
What's that exactly?
it's very similar to Putin's Russian world concept. It focuses on uniting Serbs across the region, pushes narratives of historical victimhood, national destiny. It resonates with themes Russia also promotes.
So it amplifies Russia's message.
It does, which is ironic, really, because if you look at history, Russia hasn't always been Serbia's most reliable friend.
Right.
And despite the fact that the EU invests way more money in Serbia than anyone else,
Public opinion still favors Russia and China.
consistently, yes. Polls show higher favorability towards Russia and China. It just shows how effective that long-term influence campaign has been.
Okay, so looking ahead then, what are the key things we and you, the listener, should be watching for in the next weeks and months?
Definitely keep an eye on statements from Western governments, any new warnings about escalation.
Right.
May 9th is always significant, Russia's Victory Day. See if the Serbian president goes to Moscow and how the EU reacts if he does. That'll be telling. Keep tracking Milorad Dodik in Bosnia. His secession talk, does it escalate? Are there more concrete signs of Russian support for him?
And the Ukraine ceasefire talks.
Absolutely crucial. How those talks progress or don't will likely impact Russia's bigger plans, including what they might try in the Balkans.
So what's the ultimate goal here for Russia, according to the analysis? What's the big picture?
Ultimately, Stradner suggests it's bigger than just the Balkans. The real aim is to chip away at the global order, to make NATO and the EU look weak, indecisive.
Undermine them.
Exactly. But interestingly, she also suggests the Balkans could be a place where the West might actually score a relatively quick win against Russian influence if they choose to act decisively.
A chance to push back effectively.
Actually, yes. Demonstrate resolve and maybe change that narrative a bit.
So wrapping this up, the situation in the Balkans is clearly very complex and definitely carries risks.
That's the takeaway. It's intricate, you've got history, ongoing political fights, and this determined external influence all mixed together. It's volatile, and what happens there really does matter for wider European security.
And hopefully now you, our listener, have a much clearer picture of all those interconnected pieces, going way beyond just the headlines.
Yeah, it's a reminder, isn't it? How things that seem far away can actually have really big consequences closer to home.
Which leads to a final thought for you to consider.
Yeah, think about this. Given everything we've discussed, the history, Russia's likely motives right now, what scenarios seem most plausible for the Balkans going forward?
And maybe more interestingly,
What are the wild cards? The unexpected triggers or consequences that could suddenly change everything. It's definitely worth mulling over the long-term implications of all this.